This is S.Pravallika, Assistant Professor, Department of AML, Aditya University. And in today's lecture, we are going to discuss regarding traditional model versus Agile model. So Agile model in the sense, Agile software model. So at the end of this lecture, the student will be able to explain about the traditional model as well as Agile model and the difference between the traditional model versus Agile model. So firstly, before going to start off regarding traditional model and Agile model, let us see what was the main difference that was existing. So software development projects use different types of software development lifecycle methodologies depending on their nature and requirements, which define the way that the software development work is organized. So what does this different lifecycle methodologies and models mean? So projects use different types of software development lifecycle methodologies. So not every project is using the same methodology that was existing, because when coming to the software process models, we are having multiple process models. So for example, we are having waterfall model, and followed by we are having spiral model, evolutionary model, prototype model, RAD model, V model, incremental model. So there are many models based on their project requirements and based on their project preferences. They will be choosing which model will be suitable for their project, and based on that they are going to choose the software process model and they are going to work on that. So the traditional is the waterfall model, and the latest one which everyone is using is the Agile model. So let us see the differences. So there are two main approaches. One is traditional waterfall model and Agile software development model. So let us see the difference between traditional waterfall model and Agile model. So here we can see a differentiation. So the first one describes the traditional waterfall model. So where it starts from requirement analysis to the maintenance, and if we observe carefully in this first image, this represents the traditional waterfall model. So where from the requirement analysis to the maintenance phase, everything goes in a sequential order. So first we are dealing with the requirements, next we are moving on to the design and we are dealing with the design, next going for the implementation, next towards the testing, and next towards the maintenance. So every phase will be going on in a sequential way. So we can't skip one process and we can go for the next one. So everything should be done in a linear sequential order. So the next one is the Agile model. So in this Agile model, we can see completely from the planning phase to the release and maintenance phase, and here we can observe some differences. So firstly we are having planning and feasibility, and then followed by analysis, design, development, testing, deployment, followed by release and maintenance. So here we are having some gaps between the planning and the release. So why we are having these gaps? We already know that Agile deals with this increment and iterative model. So increment and iterative model in the sense, so we are not going to develop everything in a single instance. We are breaking down everything into modules. So that means into phases. So smaller phases where we are dealing with the sprints. So we have already discussed regarding that sprint. So that means we'll be taking one particular task and we are assigning some time schedule for that, and within that time schedule we are going to complete that. So firstly we'll be dealing with the planning and feasibility study, and once we are done with that and once we are okay with that, then we'll be going for the next one. So nextly, analysis. So we'll be dealing everything in a smaller chunks. So the design or else the model or else the requirements, whatever the task that we are dealing, that will be broken down into smaller chunks, and based on that smaller chunks everything will be done in an incremental and iterative way. The traditional way goes in a sequential order, whereas in this Agile model we'll be going with this increment and iterative model. One I stands for increment and one I stands for iterative. So this was the difference that we can showcase in the starting itself. So moving on to the next one. So a deep knowledge regarding the traditional methodology followed by the Agile methodology. So firstly let us see regarding traditional method. So traditional method uses a linear approach where the stages of software development process must be completed in sequential order. So this is what we have learned in the beginning itself, and also it is the one which is going on till the date. So that means every stage should be done in a sequential order. So we are starting with one phase, that particular phase has to get completed. Next phase will be beginning only after completion of the first phase. So that happens in a linear sequential order. So this means that stage must be completed before the next one begins. So in order to start the next phase, we should start and end the phase which we have already started. So then only we are supposed to go for the next phase. So the stages in the waterfall model: requirement gathering and documentation, system design, code and testing, bug fixes, and product delivery. So in some of the models, or else in some of the things, so in some of the models we can see the representation in somewhat different way. So that means like from requirements to the maintenance. So here we are just having change in the terminology, that's it. So remaining everything is same. So requirement gathering and documentation, where it will dealing with the requirements as well as the feasibility study. So the next one, system design, where it is going to read regarding the design. Code and testing goes with the development and testing phases. Bug fixes goes with this fixing issues as well as the deployment phase. Product delivery goes with the deployment and maintenance. So this is the 5 stages that they have explained over here. So requirement gathering to the product delivery, we are having these stages in the waterfall model. So this was regarding the traditional waterfall model, and let us see regarding agile software model. So agile software model. So what does this agile software model deals with? It uses an iterative and team-based approach. So this is what we have discussed in the initial diagram. So iterative and team-based approach. So what was this team-based approach indicates? So team-based approach goes on with the teamwork. So in the last class we discussed regarding self-organized teams. So that means where a project team will be completely involved in the project and they are having the complete rights to take the decision regarding what is good for the project and what is not. So they are the one who is taking the leading decisions for the complete project. In this Agile, we are just working on the self-organized teams as well. So next one. So Agile uses iterative and the team-based approach, means that Agile methodologies is a sequence of phases in which the software development project is completed. So sequence of phases. So we have already discussed like the project will be done in a smaller chunks, or as the modules will be broken down into smaller chunks and they will be working on that smaller chunks in order to make the project in a successful way. So rather than going on a complete phase and getting issues, they'll be choosing another alternative way. In that another alternative way, they are just breaking down the project into smaller modules, working on that smaller modules, making them into a workable form, and they are just delivering that to the customers. So its main objective is to deliver the application with complete and functional components. So this is what we are having the main objective in this Agile methodology. So they are just delivering the application with the complete and functional components. So if we are just dealing with one particular task, so that task should have a goal, and that goal is to deliver a working product. So for example, if the phase is regarding the requirements, so they need to collect all the requirements and they need to get complete fulfillment of the requirements. If they are going to have a design, so they need to have a design in a full length way, so everyone's approval should become for that design. So this is what they will be doing in the smaller chunks. So the work will be done in the phases and that phase should deliver a workable product. So next point, instead of completing the software development task in sequence, they are completed in sprints that run from 1 to 4 weeks and where a list of deliverables is completed in each sprint. So sprint is one of the software terminology where they are just taking a time a week from 4 weeks and they are assigning tasks to the team members. So the team lead who was dealing the project will be leading the team members by specifying some tasks to them. So they are going to complete the task within that time period. So within that time period, if the task is not completed, again the work will be carried forwarded to the next sprint and they are going to complete the task. So their complete final target is to give a working product. So this is what they will be doing in sprints. So there are many sprints. So based on the project modules, they are going to decide the number of sprints. So Agile approach involves the following stages. So the first one is project initiation, second one is sprint planning, third one is demos. So initialization of the project, followed by the sprint planning. So based on the project initialization, we are going to plan the number of sprints, followed by giving a demo session regarding what has to be done further. So this is what they are going to check in this Agile methodology, nothing but Agile software model. So these were the differences between the traditional model and Agile model. So let us see a differentiation table which states the differences between traditional waterfall model and Agile model. So let us see the differentiation table here. So traditional versus Agile software development model. So firstly, we can see the features here and as well as we can observe the traditional methodology followed by the Agile methodology. So the first one is development process. So in the traditional, it is linear. In Agile, it is iterative and incremental. So linear in the sense, it is going to happen in a sequential order. And in Agile, it is iterative and incremental. So that means we are having a repetition process as well as in an increasing order. So when coming to the focus, the traditional methodology focuses on software delivery. So whether the software is delivered or not will be focused mainly in the traditional waterfall methodology. Whereas in the Agile methodology, they are going to focus on the discovery and flexibility. So in the Agile, we are going to focus on discovery and flexibility. So how flexibly we are delivering the project. So next, project learning. So in the traditional, it is a rigid process. So rigid process in the sense a strict process or else an adapted process. So which is already adapted one. Whereas in the Agile, we are going with the ongoing learning. So every project will be learning something and that goes on ongoing learnings. And next one, duration and cost. So in the traditional waterfall model, we are going to define the duration as well as cost in the starting of the project itself. Whereas in the Agile, it is difficult to predict as we are working in an incremental and iterative process. It is difficult for us to predict the cost and duration at once. So the next one is teams. So in the traditional waterfall model, we are having large teams and clear hierarchies. Whereas in the Agile, we will be working on with the smaller teams and self-organized ones. So the next one is requirements. So in the requirements of traditional, it is clearly formulated from the beginning itself. So as we are going in a sequential order, everything to be clearly stated in the starting itself. Whereas in the Agile, it is unknown. It is fundamentally known. So that means we'll be just knowing only the basic things and on ongoing learning process, we are going to find. So whatever requirements we can add on. So next one, change request. So in the traditional waterfall methodology, it is difficult to implement the change request as it is not planned. Whereas in the Agile, it is possible and as well as it is planned. When coming to the delivery, finished product at the end of project. So in the traditional waterfall methodology, we are not involving the customer from the starting to the ending. So we are just submitting the finished product at the end of the project. So if there are any issues, again, it will be happen from the beginning. Whereas in the Agile, we are just going with interim results within the project. So that means based on every phase we are dealing, so we are just supposed to submit the results to the customer. So this was the differences between the traditional versus Agile development. So at the end of the lecture, a student will be able to differentiate between the traditional methodology as well as Agile methodology. So this is what we discussed regarding traditional model versus Agile model. Thank you.